So, Annabella, you have over 25 years of experience in admissions. And right now, admissions are coming soon. I mean, the college application cycle this year is coming heavy. Students are really stressed, right? And one of the most stressful parts about, the college admissions process is writing those essays and those supplemental essays for every single college. So, in your opinion, what are they really trying to get from your answers?
So, yes, this is a very, very stressful time of year, but it's the most exciting. And the essays for me are what I'm really passionate about. What are they really trying to get at? They want to make sure that the student is a great fit, that they're going to be like, wow, okay, we really want this student in this college. Maybe it's because of the diversity or the life lessons or the stories, but we want it to be like, we think you can really contribute to this environment. And we can do these by relaying these types of stories. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And as you know as well, there's like the main personal statements and those supplemental essays. And obviously they read the whole thing when reading your application. So how do people end up doing sometimes really good personal statements, but mess up with the supplemental essays? Like, what's the difference?
So I've noticed a lot of students, they can spend months on a personal statement. And then 2 weeks before the application, oh, I need to write this supplement. So it really feels rushed. Like when you're reviewing things, and after having so much experience in this realm, you can already like sniff out what's going on. Like, did this person really take time on this? And it can be because like a lot of repetitive words, or maybe not such a strong idea. So that's one of the biggest pitfalls. The Comment Up essay is stellar. And then the supplement's not that much. So it can even make colleges wonder, like, did even the same person write this out? Or did they even? And it's also like a concept of loyalty. Like, did this person really spend enough time on the supplement, or was it more on the main Comment Up?
And you've read hundreds of applications and you kind of can sniff out those things. But as you know as well, like the students writing the essays can't really do that. So what advice would you give them so that they can do it themselves and can actually write a good supplemental essay and know that they're doing their best when they're writing it?
So what I would do is this is like in writing, where you should always brainstorming. You brainstorm ideas. Let's say that you want to talk about your diversity. You think that's important to you. So you're going to say, this is something that really matters to me. So you're going to put that, you can map this out as if it were like a spider web. Okay, my diversity. But then I also want to talk about a story that happened in my life, which really can relay things about who I am. So with that, okay, so that's another thing. So what we really need to try to do is we're going to check off all those boxes, like everything, like your wish list of what you want to talk about, where you might, like, you're not going to repeat it in different places, but maybe you might sprinkle a little hint here or there. That's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've seen a lot of students actually go and try to, represent what they want to show the colleges, their values, their character traits, but they end up doing it in a way that doesn't seem authentic. And it's really hard to pinpoint exactly why. So, how do you do that yourself? And how can you help others understand how to make an actually authentic essay and not just, show something and say things?
So I think the best reflection that we could do here is imagine if you're applying to a job, or imagine that you're applying to a school. They're two totally different experiences, segments. One pays you, the other you have to pay them, and so on and so forth, right? So with that being said, when you're applying to a job, many times you're not trying to be as authentic. You're not putting yourself out there. You're just showing the best version of yourself. You're saying, hey, I'm accountable, I'm responsible, I have this certificate. It's as if like the business realm, like business school, like I have this, these are my positive character traits, right? Whereas a college essay, you can show authenticity, you can show failure. We rarely will talk to a prospective employer and be like, I totally failed in this. This is what happened. Can you believe this? Like, no, it's like, this is what I have to offer. This is my competitive advantage. This is why you should hire me and you should pay me the most amount of money. So this is a way that you can look at it. When a college essay doesn't feel authentic, it just feels as if you're just putting the best version of yourself, but in a very fake and authentic approach.
Yeah. And a lot of colleges do ask like the same kinds of questions. So I really want to go into that specifically, and I love your answer for that. I do agree that authenticity is probably the best thing that you can have in your college application. Like a lot of people say like, oh, I had this business and it failed. Should I talk about it? And it's like,
Yes.
that's exactly the thing you should be talking about. That's
Yes.
probably, how you feel as well with those things, right?
Correct. I couldn't agree more with you because so I have a student that well, every single year I have like entrepreneurial students, but one comes to mind where he's talking about the failure of his businesses, that it's not just, oh yes, I'm making millions of dollars and this is all great, but part of it being like a business entrepreneur is learning how to fail, learning how resilience, grit, how to get back up. So showing that type of story. So I am a total book hoarder. I love to read. I have a crazy amount of books. Would I want to read a book about, like, let's say a business book? Would I want to read a book about like how business is always perfect and everything was seamless? Or would I want to read a book about somebody that's like, look, I screwed up. Maybe I ordered too much of this inventory, or maybe I misspelled a word on the package. I want to learn from that person's mistakes. Same thing about this essay. I really want to get to know the student. And if it's a little bit too fake and perfect, I'm just going to see through it.
I mean, the more obstacles, the more epic the story. That's kind of how it works. Yeah. So I really want to dive into the most common, as I mentioned previously, the most common questions that colleges ask, since a lot of the times you can just like recycle the formats for multiple questions for different colleges. So I want to go straight into it. The first question I want to ask is, how do you respond the why this college, the classic why us essay? Like everyone says that you have to show fit. You have to show that you fit into the college and that you fit right into their culture. What does that even mean?
So the why us question, I always like to rephrase it like, why you at this school? So like, why will you be a great fit at this school? So remember, this doesn't have to be a brochure about the college, state-of-the-art building with this and that. They already know what they're about. You don't have to like talk to them and laud them and tell them how wonderful they are. They know about them, right? But it's more about like, okay, if we were to place you on this campus, what would a day in the life look like to you? Or where will you be spending your time? Where will you be hanging out? What do you like to do? Little things like that. And it can be so many aspects. Like it could be like an academic approach. So you could be like, I'm passionate about learning about the Drosophila, which are the fruit flies. So I'm going to be in this lab. Or, you know what? I have an allergic. I don't, but like I just remembered I have a student. But what if I say I'm allergic to nuts and seeds and blah, 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 and I love the fact that you have an allergy-free cafeteria and because of that, I really appreciate that. So things that they might be like, wow, okay, we're getting to learn more about who you are. And you're showing us that you know who we are. It's like, okay, so this is, how like the analogy that I told you about applying to a job? If a prospective employer would ask you, why do you want to work here? You want to show them that you've researched. You don't want to appear as, oh yeah, I just went on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever and applied to 50 places per day. No, you want to say, I know your values align with mine. I learned about this, and they went like, wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, and I love that reframing on why they should choose me instead of why I'm choosing them. I love that.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, about the research directly is that students do research. Nowadays, it's as easy as ever to do some research. It's just like putting on ChatGPT things that fit with your profile. But a lot of the times, it ends up being like a bullet list of random things that you like of the college. And it just sounds like you've done research, but kind of superficially, or maybe it was deep research, but you just list so many things in an essay that sometimes it's even like 50 words long. There's no way you can actually make it feel like connected to you directly. So how would you actually prove that you've done your research and that the things themselves are actually authentic to you and not just like listing things?
Correct. So if you were to, and now that we have so much AI nowadays and everything, if you were to even copy paste the why us prompt, and you could say like, oh, okay, look, Chat or Claude or whomever you're using. Obviously, I don't encourage using ChatGPT to write your essays, by the way. But let's say that if you're like researching, if you find the most superficial type of information where it's like, yeah, okay, you want to study marketing, so take Introduction to Marketing course. No, doesn't work. Because everybody's going to be saying the same thing. You're not really having that added value. But if you were to say, look, the fact that you offer an interdisciplinary education, and while I'm studying this, I could really take this great books course because I really love literature, things like that. They could be like, wow, okay, this person really, really researched. And it's not just about naming one club here and one course there, but it's about showing what you would do on campus that really matters to you. It's kind of like, like the analogy that I told you about like applying to jobs. Same thing with what do you appreciate? What are your values there? And you can even include authenticity there. Don't tell anybody. And I know this is a video, but I would spend so many hours at the Penn Library studying. But there's like this amazing lounge section, and I would totally fall asleep there for a little bit, and then it was like a power nap, and then I would study. So I would say I will spend my days at the library. It's very convenient. It's very cozy as well. And, the fact that you have this food court, you have an indoor tennis court here because I play tennis, and then this type of course, photography, whatever, things where they will get to know who you are.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just a final quick question on this. Do you have like a recommended amount of things you should talk about on that essay? Like maybe 2 or 3 things works best, or maybe just one thing that really fits? Is there a number that maybe works best?
So my number is 4, if possible. You want to talk a little bit. You don't want to talk about way too many things. So anything that's over 5 is just going to feel scattered and that you're just listing things all over the place. But we also have to keep in mind that we also have hobbies. Maybe we're pursuing or we're playing around a double major or a minor or something, and we want them to know about our passions, right? So if you talk about maybe something like, you could talk about your major, you could talk about maybe a possible minor, double major, those are 2. But you could also talk about a hobby of yours, something that's really important to you. Maybe it's an indoor tennis and the college offers an indoor tennis. And then it could also be something quirky about you, not just a typical, I enjoy doing this, I like doing this, but maybe something that's really important and valuable to you. Maybe it could be like the allergy component, or maybe it could be something else where you're saying like, this is who I am. So I appreciate that your college offers this. Yeah.
How would you answer the why this major essay?
Okay, so why this major? I would start with an attention-grabbing statement. Now, it doesn't have to be very, very creative. It doesn't have to be, but at the same time, like it has to be something appealing. Imagine that the college has been reading essays and applications one after the other, and it's a Friday at 4:50 p.m., and they're reading the why us, and they're like, okay, here we go again. You're going to take this club, you're going to be engaged in this club, and you're going to take this class and all of that. But the way I would tackle this is kind of like a, why not this college? It aligns with my values. It's something where I could really flourish. This is what I have to contribute to it. And then end with that same type of hook.
The thing is though, with these prompts, is that students a lot of the time mix it up with the why college essay. I've seen it go like both ways, and they end up merging both questions into one. They end up explaining why they major at the college when sometimes the prompt just asks about your major. So should you talk about the college if the prompt isn't asking you to do it? Or how do you make sure to not mess that up and actually differentiate the why us and the why major on completely different essays?
Okay, so yesterday I was with a student and I said it right away. I'm like, this is a college's pet peeve, and it's now my new pet peeve. So the first thing is, we should never, if somebody were to ask you, what's your favorite color? The ideal thing is not to begin answering the question right away. So what's your favorite color? My favorite color is lavender. Okay. The thing is, yes, you're answering the question, but you have to kind of go around it. Maybe, imagine being in the south of France and Provence and the lavender fields, that majestic purple tone. You're already kind of like sniffing the lavender color, right? So same thing here. We have to be very careful with recycling essays. So it may happen that you might say, okay, you know what? I'm just going to grab a little bit from here. And it may sound as if you're grabbing the why us or the why this major. So in order to feel a little bit more personalized, if you're talking about your major, you could talk a little bit about the college, but more about when I talk about the college, like let's say if I were to say, I want to study philosophy. So I'm going to talk about the College of Arts and Sciences and how how that specific college has such a great program. So in a way, you are talking about the college, but it's more about the major because they're asking you about the major. Yeah.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Some schools allow you to apply undecided, and some of them actually do have the why major essay as well. If you're not really sure what you want to study, how do you make sure you answer this prompt honestly? Because it must be really, really hard.
Yeah. So I've had situations, and colleges really appreciate this. I've had situations where students, maybe I'm going to give you one example. I've had a student that is between studying engineering versus architecture. And in the why do you want to study this? You could perfectly say, you know what? I am between these two. This is what I've done to further pursue or to understand whether I wanted to do this or not do that and intern. But you're not just going to like just scatter things around and say, look, oh, possibly this, we'll see, we'll go. But you could say, well, and I appreciate the fact that this college offers interdisciplinary courses. I can start undecided while I am showing you that I've been able to do both engineering internships and architecture and maybe a summer program here and there. But the fact that the school allocates the curriculum so that I can still ponder on this, that is valuable for me. Because it could happen. We don't really need to know at the age of 18 exactly what our life holds. So you might still say, I don't know what I want to study, and that's okay. But in a strategic way.
So you can make it a strength, as in, I'm interested in all these things, and I'm going to connect them because I'm interested in all of them. And architecture and engineering is pretty connected in a lot of ways. So you can actually make it your strength, kind of like your theme on your application to mix different things.
Exactly. And you see how you're still, so this also has to do with control. You can actually control what you're talking about in your applications. You can choose. And at the same time, with that control, you can say, I want you to know everything I've done to get closer to this type of major and what my train of thought is here so that they can really understand. Because if they were to, let's say hypothetically, if the college were to look at a list of your activities, they might say like, why are you doing an internship in architecture and another one in engineering? Like, why is that scattered? When you're able to express your feelings regarding this, they might be like, okay. And that's clever what you're doing.
This other question, in my opinion, is one of the scariest ones to answer, and the ones that a lot of people just have a ton of options to write about and they don't really know what to write about. So it divides itself into a bunch of different essays, but in general, it's the community, identity, or diversity essays. Those specifically, people don't really know how to tackle them. I remember I had a lot of trouble with it. So how would you go about answering these?
So the way I would go about answering this is try to be as authentic and unique as possible. So I'm going to give you an example about my life, but then I'm going to give you another example so that you can see what I'm talking about. I am Jewish and Hispanic. That's something that is important to me. So maybe I might tell you, you know what, a Friday night, I might eat brisket at home and this whole lavish meal and super exciting and a lot of food and maybe too many desserts, which is never a bad situation. But I'm also, since I'm Hispanic, I'm also Venezuelan. I was born and raised there. Maybe the next day I'll have an arepa and then I'll put a little bit of the brisket from last night. So the more unique, the better, in the sense that I'm not just saying, oh, I'm Hispanic, because Hispanic can mean so many things. Or remember what I told you. So my mother's Italian. So I once told you when we were working on like analyzing colleges that when I go to Starbucks, I never order ice. So I'll order something where it says the iced, but no iced. And they're always looking at me like, what? Because my mom would always tell me, did you get a cold? Oh, you were probably drinking something with ice or walking barefoot. So that's still stuck in my head. So you see, like incorporating these things about diversity is important. Now, also keep in mind, I was the other day talking to a student and he was telling me, Annabella, okay, great. I loved your analogy about the brisket with the arepa. I don't really have many diverse experiences. So what I also recommended is think about like your family nucleus. What are things about like your family culture that you do that make you feel that that's part of your identity. So he was telling me like, well, I have dinner every single night with my family. That's something that's really important. Traveling, but not just like traveling the world, but like experiencing certain cultures. And then with that, we can really hone in and find something specific about a person's identity.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So imagine if it's a Friday at 4 p.m., they're going to be like, oh, that was a person that did so and so. That's the idea.
Got it. Yeah. And what about those community essays? Since a lot of the time, they're really looking for things outside of your family and other communities you've been involved in. How do you answer those?
So the community one is a good opportunity to talk about your experiences and activities that really mean a lot to you. Maybe you didn't have much space in your main Common App essay to talk about it, or maybe it's in your Common App activity, but maybe it's just like very subtly spoken about, or maybe you just didn't have space. So I've seen students that they dance every single day of the week, and then that's their community, that they're doing that. Little details like this where you could really showcase that maybe it's not your diversity, but it's your chosen community. It's something that you are accountable towards. You're there, you're responsible, you show up, and that becomes your chosen family.
Yeah, and I believe most people, and a lot of people do say, like, I don't have a community like this. Most likely you do, at least at one point, right, during high school to talk about. And what I've seen, and I want to hear your opinions about this. So I've read a ton of essays recently, and one of the things that I love the most on these type of essays is really specific moments. What I've noticed is that the longer the time frame the story is like presented in, so if it's a story that lasts a couple years or 1 year, it's going to be more generic and less authentic than something that lasts 10 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day.
Correct.
What do you think about that? Do you agree?
I agree. So we don't want to, what I tend to avoid typically, but depends because you know how there are always exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
But typically we don't, like in the main essay, we don't want to talk about a one-time thing that just happened like right away, because it might be like, well, but what about like your whole life and everything? And at the same time, you don't want to say, you know what, I've been playing tennis my whole life and it's been great, because it just sounds a little bit generic. But if I were to tell you, you know what, that Thursday afternoon in the scorching, humid heat, I thought I was going to win. I was so sure of myself. And then little by little, I noticed that I was actually losing. And then my palms were sweating. I really had to have an internal conversation with myself. It lasted 30 seconds, but then I won the game. So you see how maybe we're talking about like one match, and then that's really shedding light on like who, instead of just saying like, oh, I play tennis all my life, because that doesn't really talk a lot about like one specific situation.
And within those prompts, what are the most common mistakes you see students make? Because I feel like students really do get confused with these kind of questions and make a bunch of mistakes.
So the most common mistakes I see are, it feels like a very redundant essay. So many times I see students that will ask or will look up like, oh, okay, I want to see examples of essays. And it just sounds very basic. It sounds like every other college essay. So the mistake that we're making is we're trying to, be between the lines and make sure it's good enough. But we don't want good enough. We want it to be extra. We want it to be extraordinary. So remember how, like everything in life, let's say that you're having an interview, you're having a conversation, you're writing an essay, you read a book or whatever it is, you want something to stick to you, that you're going to be like, oh, okay, you're the person that really likes to eat the arepas with a brisket, or you're the one that blah, blah, blah. Same thing here. You want to be as specific. You want to put yourself out there. So they're going to be like, we like that. We like that type of authenticity. Yes. So let's not be basic in life.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to be boring, right? If you expand on those things, absolutely, yeah. This other prompt I'm going to ask you about, students do get confused with the first one, and sometimes they get confused, but they kind of use the same system, and when one college asks for both, they don't really know what to write about in this one. So this is the other classic, describe a challenge or growth experience. How do you go about this one?
Okay, so describing a challenge or growth experience, it could happen. I see this a lot, that they get to the supplement and the student might be like, "Oh, I already wrote about this in my Common App essay.
Yes.
What else am I going to talk about? I don't want to sound as if my life is full of challenges." So it could happen. That's a reality. Sometimes we can't sugarcoat it, and it's like, okay, we need to think of something else for your supplement. Maybe we'll think of another challenge or something else. The main thing here is resilience. We want to talk about grit. We don't want this to sound like a sob story. We don't want it to sound as if it's still a problem. So we want to see how you've solved it or how you've overcome it. And in a way where they're going to be like, this person is going to do really great in this college because look at what she did when this happened to her, type of approach. Yeah.
And how do you make sure it's not cliche?
So being very, very specific about what happened to you, what you did, so that it's so unique that they're going to remember who you were. That's the idea here. And besides that, it's just like thinking about always, like whenever I see a student's essay, the next question that I always ask is like, what else do you think we could add here? Like, what else? Like, let's sprinkle more and more and more.
And, does this incorporate humor most of the times? Do you think that's yeah?
Absolutely. Yes. Even if you're talking about a challenge in your life, that could be something, it could be something serious. Maybe it could be a medical situation or whatever situation. You could always, obviously being very respectful. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say, and this could be, you see why I'm talking about being respectful. Let's say that we're talking about food allergies. This is something, it's a very important matter and it's a serious matter. But the student could say, okay, you know what? I'm used to ordering, I don't know, steamed chicken in the restaurant and steamed vegetables. That's like the safe order in whatever restaurant. So you could say 571 chicken meals later, I've learned to perfect this recipe or something like that. So you see how you can still incorporate a little bit of humor without saying like, oh, this and that, but you can be very conscientious. And with that, that's like a good connector. You're breaking the ice.
So not making it a joke, just having humor about it.
Yeah.
Because,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
humor is that authenticity, that it's like, look, every time I go to a restaurant, I have to order the chicken and I have to really double check with the waiter that they didn't use the sesame oil. Same thing here. But you could use a little bit of humor that you're like, yes, I'm the one that orders the chicken.
And humor is also a way where you can be vulnerable without oversharing. And that also make sure that it's not a sob story and you actually have a good outlook with the story that you're talking about. Because a lot of people do overshare quite a lot.
And it's like, imagine that you're at a party or you're networking somewhere, right? Sometimes when people overshare, it can be a little bit like awkward. That it's like, okay, what do I do with this information? Let me just go. I need to use the restroom. Bye.
Yeah.
But so not oversharing. You don't want this. Whenever anything is like a red flag, and many times colleges have told me, even if it's a pink flag, no, right? So we have to be careful with that when we're talking about an issue. So at the same time, we can't overshare. And it should be something that they might be like, oh, okay, that's cool. We learned this about you without it sounding too draining or too drastic.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, the last question I want to ask you about, it's not like one specific question, but more of like a general group of questions. And it's those quirky essays or short questions like the one U Chicago asks all the time. Things like, what brings you joy? Or what do you like doing outside of, curricular stuff? So how do you go about those quirky or short questions?
Okay, so the quirkier, the better. If they ask you something quirky, you have to respond to something quirky. You don't want to respond with like, what do you think they would like? Blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't want to sound professional. We're not applying to work at Yale. We're applying to, or any college, to contribute, to learn, to thrive, to grow, right? So because of that, when they're asking you, what inspires you, whatever it is, right? There are some schools where they might ask you, you're writing a book, what's chapter so-and-so or whatever, or what's the first sentence. They want to know what fuels your curiosity, what motivates you in life. How do you think? How do you connect ideas? And also, like, what kind of impact would you like to have on campus? And you could talk about like a specific moment in your life. You could talk about a conversation, a person, a story, or a concept, something where you're talking about like what inspires you. So obviously start with like an attention grabbing statement. Like, a specific moment in your life where something happened, and then an explanation. Why is this mattered? Why does this matter to you? What's the situation? And then connect it to your future you. How do you see yourself with that? And this could also be connected to, there are many essays that have to do with like, talk about a conflict that you've had or a situation or a dialogue. I'm going to give you an example because I know this may sound very vague. So I had an aunt who lived until the age of 104. She studied physics. She was like very, very educated, very well read, etc. And many times I would have pretty interesting conversations where when I lived in Italy, she would ask me, I would go to her house Friday evening. She was always very well dressed. And we would talk about culture, the opera, politics, blah, blah. But then many times she'd be like, okay, what's the role of a woman in society? So I would have pretty interesting conversations with her. So with that, they could be like, wow, okay, so she's really engaging in thoughtful, meaningful dialogue, and it's unique. Yeah.
It's a cool story to talk about. Yeah, totally. And what about those other essays? For example, I remember in U Chicago, there was this one that I wrote where the prompt was like, if you could bring any slang back to life, what would it be and why? That's really quirky and really weird. And I remember writing really like stupid things in a funny way. But what would you recommend, like a step-by-step system to answer these things?
So first, think about your identity. You want to make it unique. You don't want to say, oh, locked in, slay, or anything current. You don't want to do that, right? But you want to tie it into you. Maybe you like a specific type of genre and you're like, I want to use this type of word because it's connected to this genre and I really like whatever it is, right? And then make sure that you're talking a little bit like whatever meaning you want to give to, right? If you're locked in, you're focused. If you're slaying, you're really excelling. So you don't want to use a slang word that it's about like somebody being down or that you'd be like, why would you even use that word in your vocabulary? So think about things that you would use in your own language, your own vocabulary, and then create that word. And you can be as quirky as possible. You can invent as much as possible. No one's here to police you around.
So connecting back to self, that's kind of, okay. Yeah, because it does vary a lot of the times. NYU does have like quotes that you have to write about what you think about the quote. And so connecting back to self.
Yeah. Correct. There's an example. Vanderbilt asks you a prompt of when, like one of it's dare to grow. So when have you dared to grow? So if you have something that has to do with like growth, that type of connect it to yourself, and then it'll be very unique.
What do you think more and more colleges are adding more of these short and creative prompts? Because it's like a pretty new thing and it's a trend that I've been seeing. Colleges are adding more and more. Why do you think that they're doing this?
I think they're getting a little bit bored of the why us? Why do you want to study this major?
Must be boring, yeah.
Yeah, and like imagine you're having a conversation with somebody, and you're like, you know what? Tell me more. I want to learn more about you. What if you were to? And then you have like these random questions. I'm the type of person that I love asking like the most peculiar type of questions, like what if you woke up and you have a lemur tail? Like the most random questions. What would you do? How would you react? Same thing here. They want to get to know more about your reactions, who you are, your identity, and your culture and your values.
So in your application, you do have, for Ivy Leagues, like Harvard has like 5 supplemental questions apart from the personal statement. Like you have a ton of these. And they all play a different role in your application. So what's the strategy to keep them connected? Like when you read an application yourself, when you're reviewing a student's application, what do you see in connections and how do you make it all connected to make one profile?
So making it all connected is that when you connect it, you're inviting them to connect the dots. In other words, remember in the beginning we were talking about like creating a spider web that you might say like, okay, my diversity is important, then this other components, and then you're subtly referencing everything. You don't want each question to appear as if it were its own island, as if it were like a different student's college essay, but more like, oh, okay, you're talking about this here, and then you're mentioning this here. So it's all part of like a portfolio of who you are, and then everything is all put together.
So, I know it's gonna sound dumb, but I'm thinking of it as a cinematic universe, kind of. Like if you were to see Marvel movies, you do have like Spider-Man and Iron Man and Captain America, and it's like different stories, but they end up talking between
Yeah.
each other and there's like references.
Yes.
I know it sounds kind of stupid, but I think it makes sense. I mean,
No, yeah, it's genius what you said. And you see how when you're watching these movies, you could be like, okay, it's the same creator, it's the same idea, it's the references. And that's the aha moment that we want to inspire.
so now that we're in the last steps, the last months of the 2025 application cycle, what's one piece of advice you'd give to people writing supplemental essays right now?
So, one piece of advice is be fearless, be bold, and be yourself. Sorry, those were 3. So,
It's fine.
and that approach is don't try to be, okay, will I be on the safe side if I talk about this, but more, how can I really stand out? So be fearless, like give it your all, talk about who you are, and be specific, be authentic about it because they will feel that.
For a first draft, maybe just as if we were talking to a friend, like really, really outgoing, and then you can cut off that later.
And then you can
something like
cut
that.
off and you can be like, well, maybe this I should take away.
Yeah, maybe it's too much.
One thing that's useful as well is like, you could ask a good friend, a family member, hey, this college is asking me this. What do you think if I were to respond? How would, so looking at it at that perspective, if you're comfortable, you can even share your drafts. You could be like, does this sound like me? Or does this sound like somebody else? And then people can really tell you, hey, yes, that's a great depiction of who you are. Or no, you're pushing it. You're a funny guy, incorporate humor. Or maybe you're not the funny person. Maybe you're incorporating a little bit more about curiosity and intellect in your applications.
Well, that's really smart. I mean, your family and your friends are probably the people that are going to notice if you're being authentic. And if they notice and they see authenticity, then you're probably going to be authentic enough. That's a good way of checking it.
Yeah, absolutely. They're gonna be honest with you. And if you think they won't, think about your favorite pet. How would your favorite pet respond to that? Would they be like, is that really you or no? If they could tell.
Well, thank you, Annabella. I think this is really, really useful. I would have loved to heard all of this like when I was applying back then. But yeah, thank you very much for coming on here. And this was really good.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day. And we've got this. This is great.